When you read the gospel accounts of Jesus' ministry, you'll notice that he was constantly doing good things and healing people on the Sabbath. Now, you might be thinking, is that a bad thing? Well, it's a good question. According to some, it was. I would say it's not. But that's the question that we're hoping to answer in this video as we look at a passage in John chapter 5, verses 1 to 18. In verse 1, it says, "After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem." The chapter begins with those words, "after this," which sort of begs the question, what was he doing before? Well, in chapter 4, we know that he was in Samaria. In verse 4 of chapter 4, it says he must needs go through Samaria, meaning he had a divine appointment. And of course, we know what that appointment was. It was with the Samaritan woman, or the woman at the well, as it's often referred to. And he witnessed to her, and then he went to the villages in Samaria after talking to her and witnessed to other people and spent a couple days with them. And in verse 43 of chapter 4, it says, "Now after the 2 days, he departed from there and went to Galilee." Then we're told in chapter 4, verse 46, "So Jesus came again to Cana of Galilee, where he had made the water wine." And that account is recorded in John chapter 2, Jesus' first miracle. And it says, "And there was a certain nobleman," that word means ruler, "whose son was sick at Capernaum." And this will come as a shock. Jesus heals him. And that account in verses 46 to 54, or the end of chapter 4. So when it says "after this" here in chapter 5, verse 1, that's where he was before, and that's what he was doing. Then we're told here in verse 1 that there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now, we don't know what feast it was that Jesus was observing when he went to Jerusalem, because it doesn't tell us, and apparently it wasn't important for us to know, otherwise it would tell us. Verse 2, it says, "Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, which is called in Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porches." And that word Bethesda literally means house or place of mercy or kindness. And it was called that for the many cures that happened there. The 5 porches that it describes were areas with a covering that provided shelter for those who were waiting to be healed by this pool. Verse 3 says, "In these lay a great multitude of sick people, blind, lame, paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain time into the pool and stirred up the water. Then whoever stepped in first, after the stirring of the water, was made well of whatever disease he had." That's quite a fascinating description. And the fact that something extraordinary was happening there is the reason that all those sick people had gathered. And that's why they kept coming to that pool, including this man, because they had hoped to be healed. The healing of these infirmities was one of the prophesied ministries of the Messiah in Isaiah 35, verses 3 to 6, for example. And if the religious leaders had known, and maybe a better way of saying it is understood, their scriptures, they would have recognized who Jesus was because of prophecies like Isaiah 35. But they were spiritually blind. In verse 5, it says, "Now a certain man was there who had an infirmity 38 years." Now just think about this. I'm recording this in November of 2025. So if you go back 38 years, that was 1987. And just stop and think, if you're old enough, what were you doing back in 1987? I mean, it's amazing to think this man had this infirmity for 38 years. And here's something that's really amazing to think about. Jesus would not even have been born when this man's infirmity began. We're not given any details about the seriousness of the physical infirmities of the great multitude of sick people in verse 3 that were waiting, we're told, for the moving of the water, other than among them were those who were blind and lame and paralyzed. And if I had to guess, I would say that this man's condition was perhaps the most serious, which is why I believe Jesus picks him out of the crowd. Look at verse 6. "When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he already had been in that condition a long time, he said to him, 'Do you want to be made well?'" This seems like a very odd question to ask somebody who's there for that reason to be healed. I mean, that's why everybody was there. The Greek word that's translated saw here involves more than just seeing with your eyes. It actually involves knowing or being aware of a situation. So Jesus saw him, but he knew his situation. Verse 7, the sick man answered him, Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, but while I am coming, another steps down before me. This would seem to indicate he was crippled. Again, it doesn't specifically say that, but since he needed help to have somebody put him in the pool, it would indicate that he was crippled. Jesus said to him, Rise, take up your bed, and walk. And verse 9 says, And immediately, that's instantly, the man was made well, took up his bed, and walked. And that day was the Sabbath. And here's what Jesus keeps doing over and over and over again. Again, when you look at his ministry in the Gospels, he kept doing good things and healing sick people on the Sabbath. You know, the miracle would probably not have caused a big stir or a big problem with the enemies of Jesus, except they didn't like Jesus, except for the fact that it occurred on the Sabbath. And anytime we see that in the Gospels, again, that's going to be trouble. They always made a big deal about it. Jesus certainly could have come a day earlier or even waited until the next day. I mean, after all, the man's been suffering for over 38 years, but Jesus wanted to get the attention of the religious leaders. In John chapter 9, we see the whole chapter, but verses 1 to 14 especially, Jesus deliberately heals a blind man on the Sabbath. And so the same thing here, he wants to get their attention. And really, you know, Jesus has pointed out in other accounts, shouldn't you do good on the Sabbath? I mean, why shouldn't you do good of all days? Verse 10, the Jews therefore said to him who was cured, It is the Sabbath, it is not lawful for you to carry your bed. Kind of makes you wonder, since he said he needed help to have somebody put him down in the pool, what about those who had carried him there in the first place? But they might have done it before the Sabbath. I mean, it doesn't really say. But the scribes had made a list of 39 tasks that they had determined were prohibited on the Sabbath. It doesn't say that in the Bible, but that was their own rules. And carrying a burden was one of those rules. Instead of rejoicing at the wonderful deliverance of this man, again, 38 years, everybody would have known him, the religious leaders condemned him for carrying his bed on the Sabbath, and thereby, according to them, he was breaking the Sabbath or breaking the law. You know, Jesus, as I said, on numerous occasions, deliberately challenged the legalistic traditions of the scribes and the Pharisees, and they had taken the Sabbath, something that God had given as a gift to man, and had transformed it into something that never was intended by God, with all of their rules and their regulations and their restrictions. And we see that happening here in this passage. Verse 11, he answered them, He who made me well said to me, Take up your bed and walk. That seems like a fairly straightforward set of instructions. Remember, we're told in verse 9 that he knew immediately that he had been healed. A man in his condition, for as long as he was in his condition, who instantly knows that he's been healed, what do you expect him to do? Verse 12, then they ask him, Who is the man who said to you, Take up your bed and walk? But the one who was healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, a multitude being in that place. We've already been told there was a large crowd there. And I would say that the guy wasn't exactly focusing on very many details at the time. In fact, he probably was watching the water while Jesus was speaking to him. Safe to say that he was a tad bit preoccupied when Jesus was speaking to him. He was watching, waiting for that water to move, to be stirred. Verse 14, afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, See, you have been made well. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you. This statement from Jesus would suggest that his condition was due to sin. We do know that some physical conditions are due to sin. We don't know for sure if that was the case here, but this statement by Jesus would suggest that here in verse 14. Verse 15, the man departed and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well, no doubt recognizing his voice. For this reason, the Jews persecuted Jesus and sought to kill him because he had done these things on the Sabbath. That sounds like a wonderful strategy. Anybody who does good to somebody else, kill them. There's a lot of people that are fanatical like this in the world, even in our day, who they want to persecute or even eliminate, if they can, people that are doing good. They're not doing any harm, and they're actually trying to help other people. And Jesus faced that during his entire ministry. When you think about it, okay, the reason is because he did it on the Sabbath, and they, determined that was a violation of their made-up laws. It wasn't a violation of the Sabbath according to Scripture, but they were jealous of Jesus. We see that in other accounts, and they were envious of him. And ultimately, that envy, that jealousy, is why they delivered Jesus to Pilate. So they decided to persecute him. They seek to kill him because he had done this. Verse 17, but Jesus answered them, my Father has been working until now, and I have been working. Therefore, the Jews sought all the more to kill him, because he not only broke the Sabbath, again, according to them, but also said that God was his Father, making himself equal with God. The Jewish leaders understood instantly who Jesus was claiming that he was, and they changed their accusation from breaking the Sabbath to blasphemy, because Jesus was claiming to be God. And you can't miss that. That's exactly what it says. Liberal theologians and those who say that Jesus never claimed to be God, and there are many people who say that, they have a real difficult time with this passage. And in fact, the Gospel of John, which the theme of John is the deity of Christ, and we see over and over and over again where he claims to be God in the Gospel of John. If you go down to verse 24 here in chapter 5, Jesus says, most assuredly, I say to you, he who hears my word and believes in him who sent me has everlasting life, and shall not come into judgment, but has passed from death into life. I trust and pray that you know him today as your Lord and Savior. Well, thank you for visiting The Essential Truth. Please like this video, give it a thumbs up. Also, share it with someone who might be encouraged and challenged by it. Also, subscribe to the channel. All of those things are helpful to the channel and much appreciated. Also, I want to personally invite you to visit the channel and check out some of the other videos. There are quite a number of Bible studies like this one where we look at passages verse by verse. And then Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I upload Bible verses of the day that many have said are an encouragement and blessing as well. So once again, thank you for visiting The Essential Truth. This is Pastor Dave. You have a blessed day.